We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 71a. And the previous summer, the Gemara brought from Rav Huna that a person should not take interest from a non-Jew. And so the Gemara asked from our Mishnah, it seems like you could take an interest from a non-Jew. And the Gemara now answers, the difference is Bichdei Chayev. Is it in order for him to live? Rashi explains Bichdei Chayev, meaning to say if it's for the Jew's livelihood, he tirulo. So that's actually permitted. You can take interest from a non-Jew in that situation. V'yoser mikan asur midrabanan. But more than that is asur midrabanan, dil ma'asi l'misrach, because we're afraid if the person is going to get into the habit of lending with interest, he's going to lend to interest to Jewish people, which is not allowed. And the Gemara continues, Ravina says, Hacha b'talmidei chachamim askin. And here we're talking about by talmidei chachamim, meaning talmidei chachamim, as Rashi explains, Ravina Amar masnisin, meaning in our Mishnah, the Katani Malvin Osan Baribis, where it says you're allowed to lend to the non-Jew with interest, that's b'talmid chacham askin, and that's talking about by a talmid chacham. The idea of not lending to a non-Jew with interest is only by someone who's not a talmid chacham. And the Gemara explains the reasoning, Taimamai Gazer Rabbanan. What's the reason why the Rabbanan made a gezerah that you shouldn't lend to a non-Jew with ribis, Shema Yilmod Mimaisav, because we're afraid you're going to do business dealings with the non-Jew. He's going to learn from his ways. V'kevan to Talmud Chacham, but since this person is a Talmud Chacham, Lo Yilmod Mimaisav, he won't learn from the ways of the non-Jew, and so it's no problem. Rashi explains, Taimamai Amru Rabbanan, Ribis Nachri Aser. Why did the Rabbanan say Ribis by a non-Jew is Aser? Shema Yargil HaNachri Etzlo V'Yilmad Mimasav. Maybe he'll be accustomed to be together with the non-Jew, he'll learn from his ways, and again, that is not a problem by a Talmud Chacham. And the Gemara continues, Ika demasni lo lahad Rav Huna ha. There are some that learn what Rav Huna said on the previous summit on the following. The Tani Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef taught, Im kesef talves ami es ha'ani imoch. It says, you're going to lend my nation, you're going to lend the poor. And we understand from that, ami v'nochri, if it's between my nation and a non-Jew, ami kodem, you should lend my nation, you should lend the Jews first. Ani v'asher, ani kodem, if it's between a poor person or a rich person, lend the poor person first. Ani yechav, ani yeircha, if it's between your poor people, meaning to say from your family, or the poor people from your city, ani yecha kodman, so the poor people from your family are first. Ani yeircha, ani yeir acheres, if it's the poor people from your city, or the poor people from another city, ani yeircha kodman, so then the poor people from your city, they come first. And the Gemara says, Amar Mar, the master said, Ami v'nochri, Ami kodem. It says, if it's my nation or the non-Jew, so my nation comes first. So the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? Why does it even need to be said? It was on that Rav Huna made a statement. Amar Rav Nachman said, Amar Lihuna. Rav Huna said to me, Lo nitzrucha, it's necessary for the following. Da'afilu l'nochri b'ribis, uli Yisrael b'chinam, even if the person has the opportunity to lend to the non-Jew for ribis, for interest, and to the Jewish person he's going to lend for free, he's not going to get any interest. Maybe over there you would say, since he's making money off it, he can lend to the non-Jew first. So that's what we're saying. No, the Jewish person comes first. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Brayso, Amar Rav Yossi says, Bo re'ei samyu seineim shal malve b'ribis. Come and see the blindness of those who lend for interest. Adam korei l'chaveru rasha. If a man calls his friend a rasha, wicked person, so that person gets very angry, yoredim ulachayv, he's going to start harassing him because he called him a rasha. V'hei mevi'en edim v'lavlor v'kul musudiyo. But these people, they bring witnesses and a scribe, and they write up a whole document about how they're lending with ribis, v'chosman, they write it and they sign it, that they say, Ploni zeh kafar be'elokei Yisrael, so-and-so has denied the God of Israel, because if you lend with ribis, it's like denying the God of Israel. That's what it means, the blindness. If a person is called a rasha, so the person will be very angry about it, but yet a person is willing to write up a whole document that essentially testifies to the fact that he is a rasha. And Rashi explains, Yorid imo l'chayv, he's going to harass him, ragelis kote timo, he's going to fight with him, kilo hiko, kilo balahargo. When the person called him a rasha, he's going to treat it as if the person hit him, as if the person killed him. Rashi says, Vani shamati, I heard Rashi leired l'sochum noso shel chavero, that he's actually permitted to compete with that person in terms of his business, ulemayit mizonoso shel chavero, and to minimize the amount of food that person's able to have, the amount of money that person's able to make. But Rashi says, v'kasha be'enai, he says, it's difficult in my eyes to explain Yoredim l'chayev in that fashion, that it's actually permitting this person to get revenge. Sheyatiru chacham liYisrael hinokim v'ligmol ra, that the chacham are allowing a person to get revenge in this fashion, and so therefore that explanation Rashi does not agree with. Rashi says further, v'yodei amrin b'chsubas at shtei mesrei shanim is galgil adam im beno mikan v'elach yored imo l'chayev. It says for 12 years a person deals with his son, and then after that yored imo l'chayev. It's talking about a son who is wayward. Umay yored l'sochum naso ika. There, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that he's going to compete with him in business. The point over there is to say Yori Molachayev, he's going to have to do things that are going to force him to follow the Torah. Ploni Kafar, so-and-so denied, Shehilva Yisrael Beribis. We're talking about somebody who writes up a document, a Jewish person writes up a document that he lent to another Jewish person with interest. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Brayser, Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, Kol mi sheyesh lo mos, anybody who has money, umalva osam shelo beribis, and lends that money without interest, all of akasav Omer, about that person, the pasuk says, Kaspo lo nasan beneshech v'shochad, al naki lo lokach. Again, it says the person did not lend with interest, osa ela lo yimot liolam, such a person will never falter. Halamarata, this teaches you, shekala malva beribis, that anybody that does lend with interest, nechasav mismotetin, so his property is going to collapse, he's going to falter, he's going to lose his money. The Gemara says, V'kachazina delomos v'beribis, but we see people who lend and they don't charge interest, but still, v'kam mismotetin, still their finances collapse. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Halalu mismotetin v'olin, those people, even if their finances do collapse, but eventually they recover. V'halalu, but these people that lend with interest, mismotetin v'einon olin, so their finances collapse and they never recover. And the Gemara continues along these lines. The pasuk in Habakkuk says, "Lama sabit bogdim tachrish kevala rosh tzadik mimenu." The pasuk essentially is saying, why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu silent when the wicked person swallows the person who's more righteous from him? And the Gemara explains, Amar Rav Huna says, "Tzadik mimenu boleya." The person who's more righteous, he gets swallowed. But tzadik gomer, but a person who is totally righteous, eino boleya, will not get swallowed. The same idea as above. Such a person is not going to falter permanently. Rashi says, "Tzadik gomer eino boleya v'afal." Even though such a person will falter, Ola, he will recover, ve'eno nivlo liolam, he will not be swallowed forever. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Brayser, Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, Ger Tzedek ha'amor l'inyan mechira, when it mentions the Ger Tzedek, that is the full convert, the righteous convert, in terms of the sale, the Ger Toshav ha'amor l'inyan ribis, and also the Ger Toshav that's mentioned by ribis, eini yodea mahus. He says, I don't understand that. Essentially, Rebbe has a question on both of those situations in the Torah, and the Gemara explains. Ger Tzedek ha'amor l'inyan mechira d'chsiv. When it says Ger Tzedek by mechira, that's referring to what's written in the pasuk, v'chiyamuch achicha imach v'nimkar lach. It says that he's going to become poor, he's going to be sold to you. This is talking about a person who violates the laws of Shemitah, and so it says he's going to be sold as an Eved, and we understand that to mean v'lo l'chayel l'ger is not going to be sold to you, he'll even be sold to a ger, shenemar l'ger, like the pasuk says l'ger, v'lo l'ger tzedek, and we're not talking about a ger tzedek, elo l'ger toshav, he'll even be sold to a ger toshav. That means to say not a full convert, but somebody who just keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach and lives in Eretz Yisrael, shenemar l'ger toshav, like it says l'ger toshav, and then mishpachas ger, the pasuk says mishpachas ger zehanachri, he'll even be sold to a non-Jew. Kishu omer o le'eker, and when it says le'eker, zehanimkar la'avodas kochavim atzma, that refers to the fact that he's even going to be sold to avodah zara itself. That's what the Brisa says. And so the Gemara now says, Amar Mar, the master said, v'lo l'cha ela l'ger. It says not just to you he'll be sold, but even to a ger. Shenemar l'ger, like it says in the pasuk, to a ger. L'meimer, but does that mean to say, de ger kani eved ivri, that a ger is able to acquire an eved ivri? That's the problem. That's the question over here. Urimini, we have the following contradiction. Ein hager nikne be'eved ivri. First of all, it says in the Brisa that a ger cannot be acquired as an eved ivri. Vein isha veger kon an eved ivri. And then it also says that a woman and a ger are not able to acquire an eved ivri. And ger lo nikne be'eved ivri. Why does it say that a ger cannot be acquired as an eved ivri? Because the pasuk says by eved ivri v'shavel mishpachto. It says that he returns to his family and bo'inan. So that's a requirement that he has to be able to return to his family. And the ger, since he converted, he doesn't have a family to return to. V'haleka, he doesn't have such a family. Therefore, he's not acquired as an eved ivri. Vein isha v'ger konen eved ivri, and furthermore, a woman and a ger are not able to acquire an eved ivri. And what's the reason for that? Isha lavo rachara, a woman, it's not proper derech eretz that she should acquire an eved ivri. And ger nami, when it comes to a ger as well. So Gemiri said it's a tradition to mikni kani, that somebody who is able to be acquired can also acquire. To lo mikni, but if he cannot be acquired as an eved ivri, we just said above, a ger cannot be acquired as an eved ivri. So lo kani, so he's not able to acquire an eved ivri either. And so that was the question that Rebbe had when it talks about ger tzedek by mechira. It talks about a ger tzedek acquiring an eved ivri, and it seems that a ger tzedek is not allowed to acquire an eved ivri. And so the Gemara answers to that question. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Eino kona means to say that he's not able to acquire a vidino ki Yisrael. He's not able to acquire an eved ivri in the same fashion with the same laws as a Jew acquiring an eved ivri. Aval kona vidino kanachri, but he is allowed to acquire an eved ivri, and he will follow the laws of a non-Jew that acquires acquires an Eved Ivri, and what's the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew acquiring an Eved Ivri? The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Hanirtza, if you have an Eved Ivri, this is talking about an Eved Ivri that had his ear pierced, and therefore he's going to be an Eved Ivri until Yovel. V'hanimkar l'nachri, and also if you have an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew, so the halacha is by both of them, Eino Ovid lo es haben v'lo es habas. If the master dies, so such an Eved Ivri does not serve the son or the daughter. So you see that there's a difference when we talk about an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew. This is a difference between an Eved Ivri sold to a Jew and an Eved Ivri sold to a non-Jew. And so that's what the answer to the question. A ger is able to acquire an Eved Ivri, but the laws will follow the laws of a non-Jew that acquires an Eved Ivri. And Rashi explains, "V'lo l'chayel l'ger," he won't be sold to you; he'll be sold to a ger le'elkai. It's going on what was earlier in the brisa. V'reisha the brisa of Meseches Erchen. So Rashi says at the beginning of the brisa we find in Meseches Erchen, "Bo rei kama kasha avka shel ribis adam nosei v'nosim b'pei rosh shvius." Come and see how the sin of ribis, what the punishment is. A person does business with produce of shvius. Sof mocher metaltal of v'chulu. In the end, he's going to sell his movable objects, etc. Ad lo basel yado at shemocher atzma. He's going to end up selling himself. Shenemar v'nimkar it's going to end up being to a ger. Nimkar lo avodas kochavim, he'll be sold for avodah zara. Lachto veitzim v'lishov mayim, he'll be chopping wood. He'll be drawing water for the avodas kochavim. Amar mar. So then the Gemara said, the master said, hashtem mefarish my kashale. Now the Gemara is explaining what is the difficulty that Rebbe had to come to Eini Odei Amahu. He said Eini Odei Amahu in reference to this ger tzedek by mechira. And then the Gemara said, by a woman, she's not supposed to acquire an Eved Ivri, lavo or achar, it's not considered proper derech eretz, shu mesiyached ima, that he should be alone together with her. And then when it comes to an Eved Ivri, gemiri de mikni kani, it's a tradition that the one that's able to be acquired as an Eved Ivri is also able to acquire an Eved Ivri, hanikna be'Eved Ivri, kona be'Eved Ivri, a person who's acquired as an Eved Ivri is able to acquire an Eved Ivri. The Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, the yesh chiluk ben hanimkar l'nachri l'nimkar l'Yisrael, that there is a difference between an Eved Ivri that's sold to a non-Jew or an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Jew. Hanirtz, if you have an Eved Ivri whose ear was pierced, be'Eved Ivri hanimkar l'Yisrael, that's talking about an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Jew, umesa adon kodem hayovel, and then the master died before Yovel. Eino ovid lo es haben v'lo es habas. So such a situation by the non-Jew as well does not serve the son or the daughter. Shenemar v'avadu liolam v'lo leben. It says it's going to be a servant forever to him, but not to the son. That's talking about by the nirtza. V'hanimkar l'nachri alfina b'kiddushin, in terms of how we know that by one who is sold to a non-Jew that he doesn't serve the son or the daughter. That's learned in kiddushin. V'chishavim koneu v'lo im yorshe koneu. Those who acquired him, not the yorshim of those who acquired him. The yorshim he does not serve. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, Ve'ein isha v'ger konen Eved Ivri. It said that a woman or a ger do not acquire an Eved Ivri. The Gemara says, Neima deloker Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Let us say that this brisa is not in accordance with the opinion of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, isha kones hashvachas, ve'eina kona esva avodim. It says in the brisa, according to the Tanakama, that a woman can acquire a maidservant but is not able to acquire a slave. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, af kones avodim. A woman is able to acquire a slave. Seems to be in contradiction to what we said above, that it said a woman is not able to be kona and Eved Ivri. And the Gemara answers, Afilu Tamer Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. You could even say that the brisa above does follow Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. When Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said avodim, wasn't talking about Eved Ivri. Velokash, it's not difficult. Can be Eved Ivri, can be Eved Kanani. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel was saying that a woman can be kona in Eved Kanani, and we were saying above that a woman cannot be kona in Eved Ivri. What's the difference? Eved Ivri tziniala. The reason is that an Eved Ivri is going to be, he's going to have discretion. So in other words, if she sins with the Eved Ivri, she can be confident it's not going to be found out. That's why it's problematic if she acquires an Eved Ivri. But an Eved Kanani paritz, but an Eved Ivri is not discreet, and since an Eved Kanani is not discreet, so therefore she's actually not going to sin with the Eved Kanani. She doesn't want it to be found out, and that's why it's okay, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, that she can be kona and Eved Kanani. The Gemara continues, Ella, but according to that, Elohadetani Rav Yosef, but that which Rav Yosef taught, our melosel lo sarbi kalba, says that a widow, she should not raise a dog, velo sishri barbe rav bushpiz, and also she shouldn't host a Talmud Chacham. Also, these are the same idea. We're afraid she might sin with the dog. We're afraid she's going to sin with the Talmud Chacham. And so the Gemara says, Bishlama barbe rav tzniyola. Now I understand, a barbe rav, you have a young Talmud Chacham, so that person is discreet. So there's a real concern over there that she might sin with him because she knows it won't be found out. Ela kalba, but with a dog, what's the concern? Kevan demasrich ba mirtasa, since the dog's going to follow her around everywhere, she will be afraid to sin with the dog because it will be found out. So it shouldn't be a problem. We should say the same thing by the dog that we say by the Eved Kanani. And the Gemara says, Amri, they answer, since if she throws some meat to the dog, it's also going to follow her around. So Amri Inchi, so people are just going to say, Mishum umtza deshadyale hu de misrach. It's just because of the meat that she threw to him. That's why the dog is following her, so she won't be suspected in that regard, and that's why there is a concern she will sin with the dog. And Rashi explains, Lo sarbi kalba, she shouldn't raise a dog. Lo sagadal kelev, she shouldn't raise a dog. Shemen takalkal imo, maybe she'll sin with a dog. That's referring to the sin of bestiality. We should note that Tosas say, Lo sarbi kalba mishum lazos fasayim bialma. It's not that we're actually concerned she's going to sin with a dog. It's just that people will say that she did that. Since the dog follows her. Tosas say that really Klal Yisrael is not suspected on these kind of sins like Mishkav Zocher, that's a male with a male, or Behema like bestiality, and there is no prohibition of being in seclusion with the dog, and so therefore it's not that there's actually a concern of a sin of bestiality, but it's just something that we're afraid that rumors are going to start. And the Gemara continues, we said above, Ger Toshav Omer Linyan Ribis, it said again that it bothered Rebbe, the Ger Toshav that was written by interest, so Mahi, what's that referring to? Because it's written in the Pasuk, V'chiyamuch achichu mata yadu imach, v'chazakta bo ger v'soshav v'chayimach, al tikach me'ito neshech v'sarbis. It seems to be talking about a Ger Toshav, and it seems to be saying you're not allowed to take interest from the Ger Toshav, v'yoreisam elokecha v'chayo chichimach. It says you have to fear God, your brother should dwell with you, should live with you, and so therefore it seems that taking interest from a Ger Toshav is prohibited. And yet, to Ramini, we have the following contradiction. It said in our Mishnah, Lovin mehenu malvin osan beribis, by non-Jews you can borrow from them and lend to them with interest. V'chein beger Toshav, and the same is true by a Ger Toshav. It seems you're allowed to borrow from them and lend to them with interest. Seems to be a contradiction to what the pasuk says. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Miksiv al tikach me'itam. It doesn't say don't take from them, which would include everyone in the pasuk. Me'ito ksiv. It just says me'ito. It's just talking about one case of the pasuk. It means mi Yisrael. You can't take from the Jew the interest, but when it comes to the Ger Toshav, the pasuk is not prohibiting it. It actually is permitted when it comes to the Ger Toshav. And Rashi explains, Al tikach me'itoksiv, it says you can't take from him interest. That's going on your brother, meaning on your fellow Jew, you can't take interest. V'chiksiv ger toshav, now with the pasuk, when it says ger toshav in the pasuk, that was le'inyan v'chayimach, that's talking about that he should live with you. Ksiv, that's going in the context of that, that you are commanded, you have to sustain the ger toshav, you have to provide for him, but it has nothing to do with the issue of ribis. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Al tikach me'ito neshech v'sarbis, don't take from him, you shouldn't take from him interest, Aval tanasa lo orev, but you are allowed to be a guarantor. And Rashi explains, Aval tanasa lo orev, arava shalove, keneged hamalva, meaning you'll be a guarantor for the borrower. Let's say the borrower borrowed with interest, you are allowed to be an orev for that loan and essentially pay back the loan with interest. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis.